back to science class. Today, I want to talk to you about the carbon cycle. Now, carbon is an element. It is located as a non-metal on the periodic table, and it is the most important element when it comes to every living thing. Every living thing is made up of carbon. And I mean, water is important too, and so is oxygen and carbon dioxide. Anyways, the point being is that carbon is super important for life. Without carbon, we wouldn't have life. Now, the carbon cycle is nature's way of recycling carbon atoms. See, if we used up all of the carbon atoms and we had no way to recycle them, there would be no way to make new life. Therefore, nature has come up with a way to recycle all of the carbon atoms in existence on Earth. The carbon cycle is a natural process, and it cycles carbon through the 4 spheres on Earth. The atmosphere, which is our air, the lithosphere, which is the ground, the biosphere, which is all living things, including myself and the plants around me, and the hydrosphere, which is the water. So, this begs the question, how is carbon cycled through the different spheres? Let's start with the atmosphere. Carbon is stored in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or methane or other gases, but those are the main ones that we're going to look at right now. We know that carbon dioxide and methane are both greenhouse gases, which contribute to global warming and climate change. Now, these gases don't just appear out of nowhere. They come from somewhere. We know that carbon dioxide is put into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels like coal or oil. It's also put into the air by burning biomass or biofuel like wood. When humans and animals breathe out, we are breathing carbon dioxide. And when we excrete our waste, we give off methane. Now, it's not just those things that put carbon dioxide into the air. There are other natural things that will do it too, like volcanic eruptions. They erupt and cause a bunch of smoke and dust and ash to fly into the air, and along, with lava and like rocks and stuff like that. But it also spews out carbon dioxide, among other various gases, sulfur dioxide, that kind of stuff. So volcanoes will add carbon to the atmosphere through eruptions. But did you know that the soil also gives off carbon dioxide and methane? Believe it or not, the soil actually breathes. So there is methane and carbon dioxide that's in the soil, and eventually with the movement of soil, it will come up and be exposed to the air, which then it lifts up into the atmosphere. Similarly, oceans also contain carbon dioxide. It's dissolved carbon dioxide. And when this dissolved carbon dioxide comes to the surface of the ocean and it meets the air, then it joins the atmosphere. Last but not least, anything that is decomposing gives off carbon dioxide. And of course, when it's exposed to air, it will join in with the atmosphere. Now, let's talk about ways that we can take carbon out of the atmosphere. There are 2 main ways. Number 1, plants. Trees and plants will take carbon dioxide along with sunlight, and they will transform it into their chemical energy. Now, of course, in order for plants to do this, they have to have leaves. So right now, these trees are not doing very much. They're kind of sleeping, although they are waking up because it is springtime. The second way to take carbon out of the air is the oceans. Just like the oceans will let carbon dioxide out, the oceans will also absorb carbon. This is called dissolution. This is when carbon dioxide gets dissolved into the oceans. And it's not just the oceans, it's also rivers and lakes and other bodies of water that absorb carbon dioxide. Now, every living thing stores carbon. Like we said, carbon is essential for life. So every living thing must have carbon in their bodies, like we do. The way that the carbon enters into the biosphere is in a number of ways, predominantly through photosynthesis. So, carbon dioxide and sunlight gets transformed into chemical energy through the leaves of trees. When it comes to things that are not trees, like animals and humans, in order for us to get our carbon, we have to eat it. So we will eat the plants, or we will eat the animals that eat the plants to get our carbon. Now, carbon is removed from the biosphere when we breathe out. We breathe out carbon dioxide, and when we die. When we die, we start to decompose, and we will give off that carbon dioxide. When we talk about the lithosphere is the ground, essentially. It is the earth. Carbon is stored in the earth, in the ground, as complex molecules. Now, carbon is put into the lithosphere by a couple of mechanisms. The first being decomposing dead animals and organisms. When dead organisms decompose, the carbon that doesn't get released as a gas will eventually join with the soil as it decomposes. The other method is sedimentation. Sedimentation occurs when carbon-based molecules or carbon-based things get compacted into the soil and then they become rock over time. Or they become fossil fuels. That's how fossil fuels were really made. It was through decomposing organisms that went through layers of sedimentation, and then they transformed into things like oil and coal and gas. Carbon is removed from the lithosphere by a couple of means. The first one being volcanoes, volcanic eruptions. The second one being soil respiration. As we said before, the soil actually breathes. Removal of fossil fuels from the ground that humans have been doing for lots of years now, hundreds of years now. And the last one is actually soil erosion. So when we look at rivers and streams, the water that's passing by actually removes a lot of the soil and it brings it downstream. And with the soil, it takes the carbon with it. So that carbon eventually ends up in the hydrosphere. Now let's talk about the last sphere, the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere is any body of water. So that would be ponds, rivers, lakes, seas, and oceans. Carbon is stored in the hydrosphere as dissolved carbon dioxide. Carbon can enter the hydrosphere through various means, erosion being one of them. Breathing and excretion by water animals is another. Dissolution of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the oceans and water, and decomposing dead animals that live in the water. Carbon is removed from the hydrosphere through oceanic respiration. That's when the ocean breathes out the carbon dioxide. It's also removed when water plants and phytoplankton perform photosynthesis to make their own energy, and also through sedimentation, when dead animals at the bottom of the ocean form into layers of rock and eventually it joins in with the lithosphere. We know that carbon gets cycled through the different spheres. Now, when it's cycling, it's in a motion. But when it's not being recycled, when it's being stored for a little while, we call that a carbon sink. So there are a number of carbon sinks that exist. There is the carbon sink that is the atmosphere. There is the carbon sink that is the lithosphere, which is the ground. There is the carbon sink of the biosphere, which is all living things. And the carbon sink of the oceans, or the water, the hydrosphere. Now, it's important to understand what a carbon sink is, because it can help us solve the problem of climate change. Right now, we have way too many greenhouse gases with carbon that are in the atmosphere. Our atmospheric carbon sink is too full. We need to take that carbon and move it somewhere else. Where can we move it to? Well, moving it to the ground would be really hard. We can't really do that. We can't really control that. And moving it to the water is also very difficult and also has a lot of other problems. Moving it to the biosphere, however, is a lot simpler and a lot easier. All we have to do is plant trees. Trees will be our #1 source of a carbon sink when we try to combat climate change. Trees are so versatile at absorbing carbon dioxide. Planting trees will not only help take the carbon out of the atmosphere, but it has a lot of other benefits for the ecosystem and the environment as well. We just have to make sure that we're planting them in the proper way. That's all all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.